Imagine waking up to the soft morning sunlight, walking toward your window and discovering that an ordinary corner of your home has become a miniature forest. Fresh green leaves fill the space, plants reach toward the light, and nature seems to have quietly moved indoors. But how can you create this living world in such a small space? No large garden, no expensive equipment, and no complicated farming system. Just a small container, some seeds, water, sunlight, and about a week of patience. But here's the question that makes this little plant so interesting. Can something this small really compete with an egg for protein and nutrition? Today, we're going to take a closer look at one of the simplest forms of homegrown food, fast-growing microgreens, and discover what they can actually provide, how quickly they can grow, how they compare with eggs, and why people are becoming so interested in growing them on a windowsill. Before we begin, there is one important truth we need to understand. Microgreens are not magic protein replacements, and a handful of 7-day-old greens does not contain more protein than an egg, simply because the plant looks incredibly nutritious. But that does not make them unimportant. In fact, they can be an extremely convenient way to add fresh plant food, fiber, vitamins, minerals, and some protein to a meal, especially when you have almost no growing space. So what exactly are we talking about? Microgreens are young edible plants harvested shortly after the first leaves develop. They are different from ordinary mature vegetables because you harvest them very young. Depending on the species and growing conditions, some microgreens can be ready in roughly a week, while others need longer. Fast-growing options can include plants such as radish, broccoli, mustard, peas, sunflower, and other edible seedlings. The idea is incredibly simple. Instead of waiting months for a vegetable to become a full-size plant, you harvest the young greens while they are still small. And this is where the windowsill becomes surprisingly useful. A sunny window can provide a convenient growing location for a small tray, allowing people who live in apartments, small houses, or places without a traditional garden to experiment with growing fresh food. You don't need acres of land. You don't even need a backyard. A small tray can be enough to begin. Now let's talk about the part that created the biggest curiosity. The protein comparison with eggs. An egg is a highly concentrated source of protein. It also provides important nutrients such as choline, and USDA nutrition data show that a cooked whole egg contains substantial amounts of choline as well as protein and other nutrients. Microgreens, on the other hand, are mostly water when eaten fresh, so comparing equal weights can sometimes create a misleading impression. Some plant leaves can contain meaningful amounts of protein, especially when considered on a dry weight basis. Research on Moringa oleifera, for example, has found significant variation in protein concentration among different Moringa types, with several varieties showing relatively high leaf protein levels. But there is a major difference between a dried leaf powder and a tiny handful of fresh 7-day-old greens. You cannot simply take a protein number measured in dried leaves and claim that the same amount exists in fresh microgreens. Water makes a huge difference. So the honest conclusion is this. The tiny plant does not magically beat an egg in protein, but it can be a remarkably efficient and inexpensive way to grow nutritious food in a very small space. And now comes the fun part. How can you grow it in about 7 days? Start with a clean, shallow tray or food-safe container. You can use a small amount of suitable growing medium, such as clean potting mix or another medium specifically intended for microgreens. Spread the seeds relatively evenly across the surface rather than creating huge piles in one place. Then gently press them into the growing medium and add water carefully. During the early stage, moisture is extremely important, but soaking the tray constantly is not the goal. You want the growing medium moist rather than waterlogged. Excess moisture can create problems such as mold, poor airflow, and unhealthy seedlings. Good hygiene is therefore just as important as water and sunlight. Use clean containers, clean hands, and seeds intended for growing and eating as sprouts or microgreens depending on the method you choose. During the first couple of days, you may see almost nothing. This is the stage when the seed is quietly absorbing water and beginning to wake up. Under the surface, the seed is changing rapidly. The root begins to develop and the young shoot starts pushing upward. Then suddenly, the transformation becomes visible. Tiny stems appear, small leaves begin opening. A container that looked nothing more than soil and seeds suddenly starts turning green. By around the 7th day, depending on the plant species, temperature, moisture, light, and seed quality, some fast-growing microgreens may be ready for harvest. But don't treat 7 days as a guaranteed deadline. Some varieties grow faster, while others require considerably more time. The best indicator is the development of healthy young leaves, rather than simply counting 7 calendar days. Once those tiny greens are ready, the harvest is incredibly simple. Use clean scissors and cut the greens just above the growing medium. Then they can be added to salads, sandwiches, wraps, soups, rice dishes, omelets, or other meals. And this is where the comparison with an egg becomes much more interesting. An egg is a compact, protein-rich food that works extremely well as part of a balanced diet. Microgreens play a different role. Instead of trying to replace the egg, think of them as a fresh, nutritional partner. Imagine an omelet with fresh microgreens on top. The egg provides concentrated protein, while the greens add freshness, texture, and plant-based nutrients. Or imagine a sandwich topped with a handful of freshly harvested greens. Suddenly, your tiny windowsill garden becomes part of your everyday meal. There is another fascinating plant worth mentioning here, Moringa, sometimes called the drumstick tree or miracle tree. Moringa has attracted enormous attention because its leaves contain protein and a range of micronutrients, and scientific research has investigated differences in protein and mineral levels among Moringa species and varieties. Historical forestry literature also reports that young Moringa leaves, flowers, and fruits contain protein, while the seeds contain substantial oil. But again, Moringa should not be confused with a 7-day microgreen miracle. A Moringa tree is fast-growing, but growing a useful supply of mature leaves is a different process from growing a tray of microgreens on your windowsill. That distinction is important because good gardening content should be exciting without turning an interesting fact into a misleading promise. So, why are these tiny plants becoming so popular? The answer is simple: space and time. Traditional vegetables can require weeks or months before harvest. Fruit trees can take even longer. But microgreens can turn a tiny indoor space into a miniature food-growing area in a remarkably short period. You can place a tray near a bright window, watch the seeds transform day by day, and harvest a fresh crop without needing a traditional garden. For someone living in an apartment, this can be especially appealing. For children, it can also become a simple way to observe how seeds transform into plants. And for anyone interested in self-sufficiency, it is a small but satisfying first step toward growing some of their own food. But there are a few things you should never forget. More green does not automatically mean more protein. Nutrition depends on the plant species, growing stage, growing conditions, and the amount you actually eat. USDA resources emphasize that food composition should be evaluated using reliable nutrient data rather than assumptions based simply on appearance. And protein is only one part of nutrition. A balanced diet requires a variety of foods and nutrients. So instead of asking, can this tiny plant replace my eggs? A better question is, how can I use this tiny plant to make my meals more diverse and nutritious? And perhaps that is the most impressive thing about the whole experiment. A tiny seed can sit quietly inside a small container, receive water and light, and within days become something you can actually eat. There is no giant farm, no complicated machinery, and no enormous investment. Just nature working on a miniature scale right beside your window. The egg remains one of the convenient protein-rich foods people commonly eat, while microgreens offer a completely different nutritional advantage: freshness, variety, rapid growth, and the ability to produce a small harvest in a very limited space. So the next time you see a tiny tray of green seedlings on a windowsill, don't underestimate it. It may not contain more protein than an egg, and it certainly isn't a miracle replacement for a balanced diet. But it represents something just as fascinating, the possibility of turning a few seeds, a little water, and a small patch of sunlight into fresh food in a matter of days. And that's why this tiny plant deserves a place on your windowsill. 7 days, a handful of seeds, and suddenly your window isn't just a window anymore. It has become your smallest garden. If you enjoyed this simple gardening experiment, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for more surprising plants, fast-growing crops, and practical ways to grow fresh food almost anywhere. Thanks for watching.